Hi everyone, I am so glad that you joined me today. We are going to work with some different textures with our recipes today, and we're going to start with a naked meatless meatball, ricotta polpette. So we are going to start by putting our meatballs together. I've got ricotta salata, which is actually a firmer, drier ricotta. If you used a softer one, you would want to drain all that liquid out before you start. But we're going to mix in our ricotta. Next, we're going to add fresh breadcrumbs. Now, ideally, you would like to have your bread be stale, and then you can soak them in milk and drain that milk out. Again, we don't want these so moist that they fall apart when we put them in the pan. This is not that stale of a bread, so I'm going to go ahead and mix that in. If, as I'm mixing in these ingredients, they become a little too dry, we can always add a little milk or water to kind of bring that back together. We're gonna add some pecorino romano, parsley. You're saying we're adding a lot of dry ingredients, right? How are we gonna make this stick together? We're gonna add some garlic. So messy in the kitchen. We're gonna add some dried herbs. We're gonna add basil, oregano, and a pinch of nutmeg, maybe 2. And then add our egg. Egg is what's going to bind these and bring them together so that they form the meatball and don't fall apart. So we're gonna mix this all up. And don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. And as I'm mixing this, I do think we need to add a little bit of milk. Just a little bit, not too much. And I actually might even add an extra egg. You can kind of see how they're starting to hold together. But I feel like another egg would do this some justice. So let me get some eggs and we'll make our meatballs and we'll come back and get the recipe finished. We're ready to make our ricotta polpette, and a trick so that this doesn't stick to your hands is if you put a little bit of water on your hands as you form these, your hands won't get so messy. So see, it makes a nice, kind of squeeze them together and then they roll into a nice ball. So actually, as we start to put these in the pan, I've got a pan that is already warm, getting hot. I didn't want to add my olive oil too soon because if you get distracted or the phone rings and you already put the oil in, you could actually start a fire. So let's put a little bit of oil in the pan. We'll start to add our meatballs. I've got some marinara sauce already made, and this is a simple marinara sauce. I'm gonna turn this down. Simple marinara sauce, it's got tomatoes, crushed tomatoes, and again, I'm using an Italian product, some onion and some basil, very simple marinara. And because these are meatless, instead of baking them or just cooking them in the olive oil, we're gonna actually let them simmer in the sauce. So let me add a little bit just because that pan is hot and I don't want them to stick. We'll give it, yeah, really hot. That'll help. We'll add some more marinara after we get these formed. So let's get those in the sauce. And once we have them formed and in the sauce, they're gonna simmer for about 20 minutes. We're gonna cover them and keep them on low. And we will have our meatless meatballs. And you know, these are a great option if you are trying to stay away from meat. It's not vegan because of the cheese, but it is vegetarian. So it's a great option where you still get that wonderful Italian flavor and the texture of a meatball without adding meat. Our ricotta polpette are done. beautiful vegetarian dish. And again, this recipe is about the texture of the ricotta, so make sure that you simmer at least 20 minutes in the marinara, but if they don't seem to be set, it's okay to go a little bit longer. Keep the heat on low just so that they don't scorch on the bottom. Our second recipe is going to be a dessert, and this one's a tongue twister, you guys. We're gonna make sfogliatella. This recipe is a labor of love, like a lot of Italian recipes. There are a lot of steps. This takes some time, so you must have patience, but I promise it will be rewarding, even if you can't say it or pronounce it. But we're gonna go ahead and start with sfogliatella. Unlike saying the word, which if you are not familiar with speaking with an Italian accent, like me, let's just call them lobster claws, because that's what they're gonna look like when we're done. So we are going to combine all the ingredients for the dough. I've got a paddle attachment in my mixer. We're gonna add flour, water, honey, softened butter, and some salt. We can add them all in at the same time, which is good, because if this paddle attachment was moving, you know I would have flour all over this kitchen. And I still might have flour all over this kitchen. So let's get that in there. And we're using a nice pastry flour, an Italian product. And we're gonna add salt, water. A trick, when you do honey or maple syrup, if you actually put some olive oil in the bowl before you pour that in, it comes out a lot easier. But let me grab a little spatula just so I can help it. I knew I had the perfect one. But see how it pours out a lot easier? Not so sticky. And let me get all that flour off the top, because when I turn that on, it's gonna go whoo. And then we're gonna add our softened butter. And we're gonna mix this for about 8 to 10 minutes till it comes together. And then it's going to be rubbed with lard, or I'm gonna use butter. And we're gonna put that in the refrigerator for about 4 hours. Okay, our dough has been in the refrigerator for at least 4 hours, and you can see we've rubbed butter or shortening or lard over it before we put it in the bowl. What you want to do is divide this into 8ths, and we're gonna work in batches. So while we take this first part and run it through our pasta machine, our pasta roller, we're gonna put the rest back in the refrigerator because we want this to stay cold. Let me get that 8th wedge out. We'll put this back in the fridge and we will start the process of pressing this. Okay, using your pasta roller on the widest setting, we are gonna take our dough and we're gonna run it through a couple times, and then we're gonna move it to the next thinnest setting. So a couple times like this. And you wanna have enough counter space so as this gets thinner and longer, you've got enough counter space to work with. I'm gonna do it one more time. So this is a laminated dough, which means we're making layers as we go. So I went from a 0, which is the widest, to a 1. I think this goes all the way to a 9. So we actually want to bring this dough to where it's so thin that you can almost see through it, but not so thin that it tears. So let's just keep on rolling. So we've rolled out our dough about as thin as I can get it without it tearing. The next step would be to put some softened butter. You want to get a nice layer of butter. As we roll this up, that butter is going to create pockets, and this is what's going to give it those ridges that kind of create that lobster shell kind of look. And typical laminated dough, you would fold and then put butter and then fold and then put butter and fold and then put butter. We're actually gonna roll this up instead of folding. So from here, we kind of, as small as you can roll it, and kind of stretch it out as you're rolling it. So it's gonna be thicker in the center and skinnier on the ends. And then once we have that, we're actually gonna cut slices. I'm gonna start here, just because that's very thin, and we're gonna cut slices. And then ever so gently, the next step would be to kind of push those layers apart till it creates a cone shape. Now, we didn't do, you know, a huge batch of this, so our cones are a little small. I know they say everything's bigger in Texas, but we're going a little petite today. But I've got some pastries that we're ready to show with the pastry filling. These go in the oven at 425 for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then when we take them out, they're a beautifully pastry filled, lobster shaped pastry. So with some patience and some practice and a lot of love, you can make this beautiful pastry-filled lobster claw, sfogliatelli. See, I gotta practice. But I think once you master this, you're gonna love this dessert. I know Giada does. If you want this recipe and the pastry cream that we filled it with, you can find that on my website, jenniferbasil.com. Arrivederci.